Husband mocked his wife as stupid in front of everyone. Her speech left him speechless. The dining room shimmered in the golden light of a late spring evening, its glass chandelier casting delicate arcs of color across the polished wood table. The clink of silverware and soft hum of conversation echoed through the spacious, open-plan home, blending with the occasional laugh that bubbled from one of the guests seated around the 12-seat table. It was the kind of evening designed to impress. Hand-poured wine, delicate hors d'oeuvres on slate platters, centerpieces with fresh hydrangeas and eucalyptus leaves arranged just so. But beneath the elegant surface of this carefully curated gathering, something raw and uneasy simmered quietly, like the subtle scent of something burning. Emma sat near the middle of the table, dressed in a pale blue silk blouse that caught the warm tones of the sunset, her dark curls pinned back neatly, her posture poised but relaxed, at least outwardly. She smiled often, the kind of practiced smile that people wear when their dignity becomes armor, and their silence the most graceful kind of defiance. Across from her sat Daniel, her husband of 6 years, tall, broad-shouldered, with a deep voice that could charm or cut depending on the hour. Tonight, it leaned toward the latter. The guests were mostly from Daniel's firm, sharp-witted analysts, middle-aged executives with expensive watches, and their equally polished spouses. It was a night to celebrate the new client deal, a contract Daniel had helped land, and which, in his words, would finally position them where they deserved to be. Emma had spent the better part of 3 days preparing for the dinner, from finalizing the menu with the caterer to polishing the wine glasses herself when the delivery came too short. At first, everything had flowed smoothly. Small talk, wine, laughter. But as the evening wore on and the third bottle was uncorked, Daniel's tone began to shift, slowly, then with sharper edges. "So, Emma," said one of the guests, a woman with immaculately straightened hair and a velvet blazer. "Daniel tells us you've been working on some kind of side project. What was it again?" Emma, a little startled, set her glass down and smiled. "Yes, I've been developing a curriculum for middle schoolers, actually. A sort of social-emotional learning toolkit that blends literature with—" "Oh, right," Daniel interjected loudly, waving his fork. "Her little school project. She's trying to turn bedtime stories into therapy or something." The guests laughed, a few hesitantly, others more comfortably. Emma's smile didn't falter, but she glanced at Daniel briefly, just for a second, as though checking to see whether that had been a jab or a joke. It was hard to tell sometimes. Harder still when the line blurred in public. "I think it's fascinating," said the woman across from her. "We need more programs like that. Kids these days are under so much pressure." Emma nodded, grateful. "Exactly. It's about helping them find language for what they feel, especially in communities where that kind of space." Daniel interrupted again, chuckling. "See, this is what I mean. She can go on about this stuff for hours, like it's groundbreaking. But honestly, sometimes I think she just needs a hobby that doesn't take itself so seriously." There was a pause, a slight shift in the atmosphere. Someone reached for more wine. Someone else suddenly found their napkin fascinating. Emma let the silence stretch for a beat before speaking again. "It's true. I can talk about it for hours," she said, her tone light but measured. "It's something I care about." Daniel laughed, not cruelly, but in that dismissive, sideways kind of way. "You're cute when you try to sound deep." That was it. The moment. Everyone felt it, though no one said a word. Not the couple sitting beside Emma, who suddenly seemed interested in their silverware. Not Daniel's boss, who sipped his wine a little too quickly. And certainly not Daniel, who, in his own mind, likely thought he was being playful, teasing, maybe even charming. But Emma felt it deeply, not because it was the first time, but because it was public. Because in a room full of voices and clinking glasses, her voice was being flattened beneath his smile. She didn't react immediately. Instead, she excused herself to the kitchen under the pretense of checking on dessert. The air there was cooler, the silence more honest. She gripped the counter for a moment, her fingers curling against the marble, not from anger, not exactly, but from something more fragile. A kind of grief. She remembered their early days, their long conversations, their shared books, the way Daniel used to ask for her opinion on everything from politics to the best way to poach an egg. She remembered how he used to introduce her as the smartest woman I know. And now, somehow, she had become the punchline in her own home. "Everything okay?" came a voice from behind. It was Lillian, the only guest Emma had invited herself, an old friend from grad school who now worked as a school counselor. She had known Emma before Daniel, before the careful house and the silent compromises. Emma forced a smile. "Fine. Just letting things breathe." Lillian didn't press. She walked over, picked up a small plate of fruit, and leaned casually against the counter. "You know," she said slowly, "people only laugh at something when it's safe to do so. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't walk away. It's say what needs to be said while staying exactly where they are." Emma turned to look at her, eyes a little glossy. Lillian smiled. "Whatever you're thinking of saying, say it. But say it your way. Don't become him to win against him." Emma nodded slowly. She didn't respond, but something in her posture shifted. She stood a little taller, breathed a little deeper. When she returned to the dining room, dessert was being served. Daniel was telling a story, one he'd told many times, about a client pitch gone wrong and how he'd single-handedly salvaged it. His voice rose and fell in practiced rhythms. The room was still his stage. Emma took her seat. She waited. And then, gently, when the story paused for laughter, she spoke. "Daniel," she said quietly, "do you remember what you told me 6 years ago, the night you proposed?" The room quieted. Daniel chuckled, confused. I told you a lot of things, I think." "You said I was brilliant," Emma said. "You said you admired how I thought, that I made you see the world in ways you never had before." She let that hang there, soft but heavy. "You said being with me made you better, that I wasn't just your partner, I was your compass." Daniel's expression shifted. Slightly. "Enough. I remember that," he said cautiously. Emma looked around the room, at the faces that had laughed earlier, at the ones now holding their breath. "I still believe in those things," she said, "even if you've forgotten how to say them." Then she turned to the guest who had asked about her project. "If you're still interested," she said gently, "I'd be happy to tell you more." And just like that, with no raised voice, no retaliation, no venom, she reclaimed the room. Daniel didn't say a word, but his silence said everything. That night, the house fell into a kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace. The last of the guests had long since departed, their goodbyes filled with polite smiles and overly warm compliments, the kind meant to smooth awkward edges without actually addressing them. Empty glasses were scattered across the table, the flickering candles melted low, and the echo of Emma's words still hung faintly in the air, like perfume clinging to fabric long after the wearer has gone. Daniel was in the living room, seated stiffly on the edge of the leather sectional, scrolling absently through his phone. He wasn't reading. He wasn't thinking. He was avoiding. The act was familiar to Emma by now. The carefully timed distractions, the ritualistic checking of emails at midnight, the way he looked past conflict rather than through it. Emma, in contrast, was methodical as she cleaned. Not because she had to, the cleaning crew would arrive in the morning, but because it gave her hands something to do. She stacked plates slowly, wiped each glass with gentle care, and when she turned off the music still playing in the background, the silence that followed felt like a decision. She finally walked into the living room, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. Daniel glanced up, but said nothing. She sat across from him, not beside him, the space between them wide and deliberate. "Do you know what hurt most tonight?" she asked quietly, her voice not bitter, not broken, just tired. Daniel set his phone down slowly, exhaling through his nose. You're still upset. Emma tilted her head. I'm not sure you understand what I'm upset about. He rubbed his hands together, leaned forward. Come on, Em. It was a joke. You know how I get when I've had a couple drinks, and I'm trying to keep the mood light. She nodded, slowly. And you think what you said about me, about my work, about how I talk, that was light? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched. You said I'm cute when I try to sound deep, she continued, her voice a bit firmer now. Do you know how long it took me to find the courage to speak in rooms where I used to feel invisible? Daniel leaned back, ran a hand through his hair. It's not that serious, Emma. I didn't mean anything by it. Everyone laughed. That's the problem, she said sharply. They laughed because it was safe, because you set the tone, and you made it clear that in our house, in front of your colleagues, I was the one it was okay to belittle. There it was, the shift in her voice, the sound of steel beneath silk. It wasn't a confrontation for the sake of drama. It was a truth that had waited far too long to be said out loud. Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable now. So what? You're trying to say I don't respect you? That I think you're stupid? She paused. I don't think you believe I'm stupid. But I do think you've gotten very comfortable pretending I'm small. He blinked. Emma stood then, not angrily, but with purpose. She walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a folder with spiral bindings and colored tabs. She returned and placed it gently on the coffee table between them. This is the program I've been building, she said. 18 months of research. Field testing in 3 schools. Independent review by a panel of educators. I've spent nights working after you fell asleep and mornings before sunrise. This, she tapped the folder lightly, isn't a hobby. It's a contribution. Daniel looked down at the folder, then back up at her. Why are you showing me this now? Emma's expression softened, but her eyes stayed clear. Because for 6 years, I've celebrated your wins like they were my own. I've stood by you in rooms where no one knew my name, but everyone knew yours. And tonight, in front of your world, I needed to remind you, and them, that I'm not here as an accessory. Daniel swallowed hard. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet. I didn't mean to make you feel like you were less. But you did, she said simply. He nodded slowly, the weight of her words finally settling somewhere beneath his defensiveness. I don't know what to say. Emma offered a small, weary smile. Then maybe don't say anything yet. Just listen. The next morning, Emma left the house early. She drove to the east side of the city where a community center stood, modest, weathered, but buzzing with life. She had a meeting scheduled with a group of school counselors and program coordinators to discuss implementing her curriculum in the upcoming academic year. The meeting went well, better than well. After her presentation, one of the directors stood and said, honestly, we need this. Kids don't just need to learn equations and grammar. They need to learn how to name their emotions, how to listen to each other, how to understand themselves. What you've built here, it's powerful. Emma smiled, deeply, for the first time in days. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind that came from being seen not as someone's wife or someone's support system, but as someone whole in her own right. That evening, when she returned home, Daniel was waiting at the kitchen island. The folder she'd shown him sat open, pages scattered, sticky notes added, his notes. I read it, he said. Emma raised an eyebrow. All of it, he added. And honestly, I'm amazed. I didn't know the depth of what you've been doing. She set down her bag, folded her arms. Because you never asked. He nodded. You're right. I've taken a lot for granted. There was a pause. You've supported me, believed in me, encouraged me even when I was unbearable. And I made you the joke to impress a room of people who probably don't even remember what they laughed at. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Why did you do it? She asked finally. What did you get out of that moment? Daniel looked down. I think. I wanted to seem like I was the one in control. Like I was the strong one in the relationship. Emma exhaled. But control doesn't make you strong. It makes you small. Partnership is where strength lives. Daniel nodded again, slower this time. You're right. And I don't want to keep being the man who only shines by dimming someone else's light. She studied him carefully. I'm not asking for perfect, she said. I'm asking for respect. I know, he said, and I want to earn it again. From the beginning, if I have to. They didn't fix everything that night. That kind of healing doesn't come in single gestures or even genuine regret. But for the first time in a long time, they sat across from each other not as rivals in silence, but as people finally ready to speak, and more importantly, to hear. The following week unfolded like the early days of spring, uncertain, hesitant, but filled with quiet beginnings. Emma wasn't sure if Daniel's sudden attentiveness was rooted in guilt or genuine understanding, and to be honest, she didn't have the emotional energy to dissect it. What mattered to her now wasn't his regret. It was her own resolve, the promise she'd made to herself to no longer shrink in familiar rooms just to keep the peace. She began waking up earlier, not for chores or to cook breakfast, but for herself. Morning coffee on the balcony. Journal entries written by hand in the notebook she'd hidden for years at the back of a drawer. Music that made her feel things she hadn't allowed herself to feel in ages. Pride, anger, freedom. Daniel noticed, of course. He came home one day to find the office, once half his, half hers, now fully rearranged. Her books spread across the built-in shelves like roots claiming soil. On the wall above her desk, she had mounted a large corkboard covered in plans, graphs, handwritten ideas, and quotes by educators, poets, and child psychologists. In the center was a printed sheet that simply read, "Do not apologize for being brilliant." He stood at the doorway, watching her pin something new onto the board. "You moved my law books," he said, not accusingly, just observing. "I moved mine out of the bedroom 2 years ago," she said without looking at him. "It's time you made some room too." He leaned against the doorframe. "Fair enough." She turned then, her gaze steady. "This isn't a rebellion, Daniel. I'm not trying to push you out. I'm reclaiming space I gave away too easily." He nodded. "I get that." They didn't argue. He didn't defend. And in that moment, for once, silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like understanding. A few days later, Emma received an email that would shift her trajectory more than she expected. It came from the Office of Public Schools, under the subject line, "Proposal Review, Selected for Pilot Partnership." Her eyes scanned the message again and again. They had selected her curriculum, her work, for a 6-month pilot across 4 middle schools in the district. They wanted her to lead training workshops for teachers and design interactive modules with their counseling staff. They were offering a stipend. They were offering trust. She let out a soft, stunned laugh. Then silence. Then tears. She didn't call Daniel immediately. She didn't call anyone. She sat in it, in the miracle of being seen not because someone loved her, not because she spoke loudly, but because her work was worthy. Later that night, when Daniel came home, she was still at her desk, papers scattered like leaves after wind. "You look like a storm hit you," he said with a crooked smile. "A good storm," she said, and handed him her laptop. He read, slowly, twice, and then he looked at her, really looked at her, like he had forgotten for a while what it meant to be astonished by someone. "Emma, this is huge." She nodded, tears threatening again. "I'm so proud of you." She nodded again, but pride wasn't enough. She needed more. "I need you to mean that," she said. "Not just because it happened, but because you see me now. Fully. Not just the part of me that shows up with wine and smiles at your coworkers." "I do," he said quietly. "I see how much I've missed. And I don't know how I stopped seeing you, but I want to fix it." She didn't rush to accept the words, but she allowed herself to hear them. That weekend, they were invited to another dinner. This one less formal, a backyard affair hosted by mutual friends. Daniel offered to skip it, knowing Emma had every right to avoid the public eye after what had happened. But she surprised him. "No," she said. "We'll go. I don't want to live smaller just because other people watched you try to shrink me." At the gathering, Emma was different. Not louder, not showier, just grounded. Solid. She didn't laugh to fill gaps. She didn't perform the role of doting wife. She was herself, thoughtful, curious, engaging, and Daniel noticed how easily others responded to that version of her, as though she had simply removed the filter that dulled her brilliance. At one point during the evening, someone asked her what she did, and she answered, not with deflection or modesty, but with clarity. "I designed social-emotional learning programs for middle schools," she said. "My curriculum was just approved for district-wide implementation." The woman's eyes widened. "That's incredible. You must be proud." Emma smiled. "I am. I worked hard, and I almost gave up on it more than once." Daniel, standing nearby, caught her eye. He didn't interrupt, didn't insert himself into her moment. Instead, he did something far more meaningful. He listened. Later that night, as they drove home, Daniel reached across the console and took her hand. "I know I've said it before," he began, "but I just want to say it one more time. I'm sorry for treating your voice like background noise. And I'm grateful you didn't let that silence define you." Emma looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "I didn't stay strong for you," she said. "I stayed strong for me." He nodded. "And I'm finally learning," he replied. "That's what love is. Not expecting someone to stand behind you, but beside you." They drove on, the city lights reflecting softly on the windshield. Two people who were no longer pretending, no longer navigating each other like strangers wearing old habits. There were still apologies ahead, still work to do. But something had shifted. Emma had stopped asking for space. She was now taking it, fully, unapologetically, and with the kind of grace that needed no permission. The morning sun filtered through the linen curtains in their bedroom, warm and deliberate, illuminating the edges of the room as if nature itself had chosen to spotlight a turning point. Emma lay awake before the alarm, not from anxiety, that tight, bracing feeling that used to greet her with each sunrise, but from clarity. Her mind was alert, not racing, and in her chest lived a quiet steadiness. She didn't feel like she was bracing herself for the day. She felt like she was walking into it. Daniel stirred beside her, reaching instinctively for her hand beneath the covers. She allowed it, not because everything had been mended, but because tenderness wasn't something to be rationed like apologies. Healing, she was beginning to realize, wasn't about flipping a switch. It was about meeting each day with intention. That day, she had two back-to-back meetings scheduled with district counselors, followed by a curriculum review call with a nonprofit in Atlanta interested in adapting her program for their after-school initiatives. The Emma of a year ago might have tiptoed around Daniel's schedule, asking when he needed quiet, making sure her video calls didn't get in the way. The Emma of now simply posted a note on the door of her home office. "In meetings 9 to 1. Please respect the space." She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She moved like the work she was doing mattered, because it did. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself confronting a different kind of silence, the one inside his own mind, where the versions of himself he had carefully curated over the years no longer made sense. He stood in the kitchen with a mug of black coffee, scrolling through a message from his supervisor. It was routine, congratulatory even, but Daniel barely registered the words. His eyes kept drifting to the note on Emma's door. He realized something quietly devastating. He didn't know how to talk to her when he wasn't performing. For so long, their roles had been fixed. He was the achiever, the one with big news to bring home, the one whose voice filled the space first. She was supportive, intelligent in a soft-spoken, non-threatening way, and always available to celebrate him, reassure him, or retreat when his ego needed the floor. Now that she had claimed her own, He didn't know what to say that wouldn't feel like another version of dominance disguised as praise. So he didn't knock. Instead, he sat with the discomfort. And when Emma finally emerged from her office around 1, her expression was focused, her shoulders loose, her presence unmistakably whole. "Everything go well?" he asked, setting down his phone. She nodded, grabbing a glass of water. "It did. We locked in the Atlanta partnership. They want to fly me down next month for a district-wide seminar." Daniel blinked. "Fly you out?" She smiled. "Yes. They're covering travel, lodging, and speaking fees. I'll be leading the keynote. Just me." He hesitated. "That's incredible. You must be thrilled." "I am." She paused, then added, "I know it's new for you, but it's not new for me. I've always had this inside me. The only difference now is I've stopped hiding it." Daniel nodded slowly, not defensively. "I'm trying to learn how to be the man who doesn't feel smaller when the woman beside him grows." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Then stop trying to be that man. Just start being him." The words weren't harsh. They were an invitation to step into a version of their relationship built not on hierarchy or roles, but on mutual regard. For the first time, Daniel didn't feel attacked by her strength. He felt challenged in a way that made him want to rise, not retreat. That Friday, Emma was invited to speak at a teachers' conference at a local university, a last-minute replacement for a speaker who had canceled, but the moment wasn't any smaller because of it. She prepared her notes meticulously but didn't over-rehearse. She knew this material by heart, not because she'd memorized it, but because it lived in her. Years of observation, late-night writing sessions, and conversations with students who taught her more than most textbooks ever could. Daniel offered to drive her. She hesitated, then agreed. The auditorium was modest, filled with maybe 60 educators and school staff from around the region. When Emma took the stage, she wore no blazer or badge of authority, just a tailored blouse, black slacks, and a quiet confidence that radiated far beyond her clothes. Her voice was steady, her pacing fluid. She spoke not as someone trying to impress, but as someone with something worth saying. "We talk a lot about intelligence in schools, about test scores, GPAs, and performance. But what about the intelligence of emotion, of empathy, of learning to pause before reacting? We treat those things like soft skills when in truth, they're survival skills." She scanned the crowd. No one checked their phone. No one whispered. "We've spent years teaching children how to win. Now we need to teach them how to be human, with themselves and with each other." Applause broke out, not a roar, but something more sincere. Daniel, seated in the back row, felt something rise in his chest. Not just admiration, reverence. He didn't clap out of obligation. He clapped because he was watching someone fully inhabit herself, and because for the first time, he saw clearly how he'd nearly lost her, not to someone else, but to a version of himself that couldn't handle her light. That night, back at home, Emma sat curled on the couch with a mug of tea. Daniel joined her, not with expectations, but with attention. "You've become." He started, then stopped. "No, not become. You've returned to yourself. I just didn't see it." She looked at him softly. "Maybe you didn't want to." He nodded. "I was insecure," he admitted. "Your strength made me feel like I had to compete. Like there couldn't be two leaders in the same relationship." Emma raised her brow. "And now, I realize a real man doesn't compete with his partner. He stands with her." Emma didn't answer right away. She sipped her tea, let the words settle. "I need time," she said finally, "to believe that this version of you is here to stay. Not because I need saving, but because I deserve to be loved without needing to prove I'm worthy." Daniel reached for her hand, gently, carefully. "Then I'll wait. And I'll keep learning." Outside, the moon rose high over the quiet street, casting a soft glow over their home. And inside, two people sat beside each other not as broken pieces trying to fuse, but as individuals learning to hold their shape while still leaning in. It was not the end. It was a beginning, wrapped in accountability and the soft, sharp edge of growth. The final Saturday of the month arrived wrapped in sunlight and calm air, the kind of day that felt like a long exhale after weeks of holding one's breath. Emma stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate pendant that rested just above her collarbone, a small gold circle engraved with the word voice. A gift from Lillian, delivered with a handwritten note that read, "You found yours. Don't ever lower it again." Today wasn't just a milestone. It was a reclamation. The school district had invited Emma to speak at their annual Educators Gala, a formal event attended by administrators, teachers, community leaders, and board members. This year, for the first time, they'd chosen a keynote speaker not from academia or politics, but from within their own community, someone whose work had sparked real change in classrooms. Emma. She arrived alone. Daniel had offered to come, sincerely, not out of guilt or performance, but out of support. But Emma had gently declined. "I want to stand alone tonight," she'd said. "Not because we're not together, but because I need to know I can hold the room without you beside me." He'd understood. And so she walked into the ballroom in a deep emerald gown, her curls free, her stride unhurried. Conversations softened as she passed. She wasn't flashy. She didn't wear power like a costume. She was power, measured, present, and real. The speech began after dinner. The lights dimmed, a spotlight illuminated the stage, and Emma stepped up to the podium. She didn't read from notes. She spoke from memory and from truth. "When I was younger," she began, "I thought being smart meant speaking like everyone else in the room, trimming my words to fit someone else's comfort. I believed that shrinking my voice made me likable, that being agreeable was a kind of wisdom. But I was wrong." She paused, scanning the faces, letting the silence deepen. "I spent years with someone who loved my brilliance when it served him, and diminished it when it made him feel less. And I let him. I accepted the jokes, the smallness, the rooms where I disappeared into the furniture. Until one day, I stopped. I stopped apologizing for who I was. I stopped performing humility that was actually fear." Gasps. Heads nodding. Eyes blinking faster than normal. She continued, "Our children deserve to be taught by people who've made peace with their own voices, because only then can we teach them to find theirs. That's what this work is about, not just literacy or empathy or classroom harmony. It's about liberation. For them, for us, for all of us who were once told to be a little quieter so someone else could feel bigger." The applause began before she even stepped away from the podium. It was thunderous, sustained. She walked off stage not as someone lucky to be seen, but as someone who had finally made herself unmissable. Outside, after the event, Daniel waited near the valet. He stood with his hands in his pockets, watching her walk toward him. He smiled. "You were."